Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
All right, well, Elseship, an unrequited affair, out now through Book. Hugtree Abraham, the author, who joins me on the program. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So there's a lot to unpack in this book, and it seems like you yourself were doing unpacking within this book. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah, it began not as a book, but just as my kind of obsessive ruminations needing to put pen to paper. Um, I just kept rewriting and reworking it in fragmentary ways over many years until I felt like I had gotten a narrative down that I could live with.
Now, when you say many years, like how long a process was this book from, first sketches to what we now see as on the printed page?
Uh, well, the inciting incident happened, I guess, exactly 7 years before the book came out. And I started writing it, maybe the day after the first event that in the book. But I didn't think it was going to be a book at the time. And yeah, so maybe 5 years of dabbling in it. It wasn't a full-time pursuit, but it was many years of engaging with the material and trying to figure out myself as a writer, because it was the first thing I'd ever written, and trying to get feedback and find how to make my way through the publishing world and make it better and, find the right creative collaborators and all of that. So yeah, I was in and out of it for a very long time.
So the passage marked day one then was written on day two?
Yes.
And at that point, you're obviously not necessarily writing with an eye to publishing. You're just writing with an eye to processing?
Yes. And I never processed that way before. And I just, for whatever reason, like was really having a hard time uh, filtering through all of my thoughts. It was just a very overwhelming experience. And I just naturally, I remember going to like a drugstore and buying a spiral notebook and just like sitting outside of the drugstore and writing, because I just felt like I couldn't get um, out from underneath it all emotionally. I don't think I've ever had an experience as emotional as that one. And it was just through writing that I um, found like a therapeutic form that worked for me.
Now you mentioned, obviously the 5 years you're sorting things out in terms of the book publishing landscape and figuring things out, but it seems like you're also part and parcel of that, figuring out narrative and how this book is shaped. Is that true?
Yes, I restructured it many times because it came about when I was first being introduced to more fragmentary and verse-like books, which I referenced many of them in L-ship. And I didn't know that a narrative could be formed that way. And so just piecemeal, I had thoughts and they didn't stitched together in any particular order. I felt like in a lot of ways I was just spiraling around and around the same thoughts. There wasn't like a linearity to it. And so, yeah, over time, things just got shuffled around quite physically. Like I would print out all of the notes and all my like scrap writings and just cut them into little strips of paper and just like rearrange them on the floor.
You're also a visual artist, right? Like you do book design
Yes.
and stuff.
Yeah.
Is that part of your practice as a visual artist, is like stitching things together visually? Like did you find you were using some of the same creative avenues that you would in that respect for a written project?
Absolutely. I think I'm a designer who writes more than a writer. My mind is always trying to find kind of metaphorical visuals for what I'm feeling. And sometimes those then come out in words, and sometimes I feel like they are best converted into some more visual or like diagrammatic format. I'm always thinking as like a visual communicator, how best to like precisely express myself. And um, so when I'm looking at like the flow and pacing of a book, I am thinking about how it sits on a physical page, and it's very important to me that I design the interiors of my books because I am quite careful about when there's a line break or when there's going to be white space or another like non-textual element just to change things up. But of course, I'm very experimental because I don't know what I'm doing. So it's just an intuitive process.
So is it that it's pleasing to you or makes sense to you when it is laid out a specific way?
Yes, I I don't think there's ever like a perfect way of doing it because every time I rewrote a draft, the visuals would sort of change. Um, but I guess my barometer for when it's right is if I feel good about it. Like it's not, there isn't some independent assessment. I worked with editors that didn't have a background in art, so they were kind of like it's up to me to make the final call for a lot of that stuff. And I just, I feel like I have really strong sense of style, and I don't always make work that lives up to that style, but I'm always in pursuit of it. And so yeah, sometimes I do something and I'm like, I think that feels cool. I just think it feels cool, and I like things, and I just want my books to be filled with things that left an impression on me that I can then um, give to the reader.
You mentioned you were introduced to like other sort of narrative books like that broke with kind of, typical memoir style. Did you read those purposely with an eye to this book and like help shape or give you like context, or were you reading those things and then that opened you up to the possibility of doing something like Elship?
The latter, yeah, I didn't. And now I think it's both. I just am charmed by that type of work, and when I'm reading someone who's trying something new, even if they're not completely successful at it, I prefer being with a book like that than a book that is like perfectly polished and familiar in form, because I am just like a creative thinker, and I like to be original, and I like to see how people are also being playful um, with the book format. And so, yeah, I just one book kind of snowballed into discovering another book, and it just went on and on. The reading list grew longer, and then I think I never directly borrowed from any kind of technique that I was consuming, but I think each thing gave me permission to also just try different approaches.
So what do you like as a reader then? Like do you, it seems like you like risk taking even if it results in failure, and that's something you maybe gravitate towards reading?
Well, I mean, more than anything, I think I discovered through these early readings just how much for me reading is about like the poeticism of language. I think everyone reads for different reasons. Escapism is a very popular reason to read or to acquire knowledge, but for me, it's like I being held within a sentence, like someone who's just put that much um, rigor into the construction of like the prose and the lyricism of it was something that like I only discovered around the time that I started Elship, and I just became like addicted to books that really could keep my focus because of like that linguistic like song. And then a second to that would be like I love just stepping into someone else's mind and the interiority of the psyche, like that is distinct from my own, but sort of feels familiar in its peculiarity. And so any books that do that, usually I take to. And now, as I've read more and more, because that was kind of at the early stages of my adult reading life, I like tire sometimes of the things that feel really familiar in that genre. And I'm increasingly seeking like more and more outlandish things or different genres to keep excited. And I feel this way when I speak to like a lot of my friends who are senior editors. They too like are lifelong readers, but they just consume so much that you're just kind of always looking for something to surprise you, and that can be hard given how much has been published since the beginning of time.
It also sounds like when you hear about like drug users who have to chase like a higher high, like that,
Yes.
the like that doesn't doesn't satisfy me anymore. The like level. Uh,
That's absolutely.
you mentioned sneaking into someone else's interiority through their language. Was that part of how you conceived of elseship? Like, were you trying to convey your own interiority through how you constructed this book?
Well, I think more what was happening was falling in love for the first time. I felt like my interiority had been invaded by hers or by my idea of who she was on the inside. And it was uncomfortable for the first time to be with my thoughts because felt like I was having them contrasted by this entirely different person who now was somehow inside of me and at odds with like who, how I saw myself. Because prior to that, I felt like quite a clear person. And yeah, the way that like when you love someone, they just like infiltrate your being. And that was very unsettling. And so the book is very much like a warring between how I feel and how I think she feels about herself and about me, and then how that makes me feel.
It does raise the question, like, about how much you know yourself at any point. And this is that, like, I don't want to like maybe psychologize here, but like that notion of like the unreliable narrator, that like we're all our own unreliable narrators.
I think I go back and forth between feeling like I'm a very unreliable narrator and I have all these blind spots and I worry about how I'm um, being misperceived in the world. But then another part of me thinks, no, I think I know myself very well, too well to the point of maybe like boredom or lack of mystery. And so I want to adopt the narrative that I am unknown and there is so much to still be like changed and discovered by. Um, and that very much is like a through line in the book of wanting to let go of certainty, because I felt like I was falling in love with someone who was very much the opposite of me in terms of their uh, sense of self. And I was like seduced by that way of being. And I was looking to be more than what I was. And so yeah, I think even to this day, I hold these two truths of like I am this immutable person that I am quite um, familiar with, but I also am desperate to allow myself to um, be changed and surprised with what I don't know inside.
Yeah, obviously you mentioned certainty is a through line of the book. It seems like the argument in L-ship is that like malleability and certainty aren't necessarily oppositional forces as we kind of sometimes conceive them to be.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So at the end you talk about, that this is an outgrowth of list making, that you love list making.
Yes, I
Hey,
do.
was that like something like as a kid? Like did you practice list making throughout your life?
Yeah, I have a notebook from when I was like, it was a notebook that I had for many years, so I obviously didn't fill the pages very quickly. But going back to the earliest pages, I have lists of like people in my life and what category I would put them in, and things that I wanted to own and things that I liked. Um, and I mean, I've just continued to expand like what can become a list and then what to do with those lists. That itemization is, I guess, a way of trying to like create order in a chaotic world, to
Yeah,
see patterns and feel like there's meaning behind things that maybe you don't like.
I did want to ask, like, is it to help with your own thoughts? Like, if are your thoughts kind of like so disparate and scattered at times that this kind of like centers things or helps you sift through them?
Uh, I've been doing it for so long. Like my systems of organization are such a companion to my um, inner processes that it's hard to say at this point because it's like a tool like that I have just like it's like a muscle that I've strengthened since I was very young. And so I don't do anything without my pen and paper next to me. Like I every day make my lists and externalize like my thoughts on paper. And so I don't rely on my I don't just rely on my memory for anything. Like I I need the habits that I've created outside of myself to also be like a reflection of my mental workings.
So there's like an ordered routine that helps order things right from the get go. This isn't you like purposely being like, oh, my thoughts are everywhere, I need to order them.
No, my thoughts are not everywhere, but I think I love being a person who um, holds stillness, and I consider myself someone who likes to start every day like a blank canvas, and I like a clean space, and I like everything to have its place. And I'm not a very regimented person. Like I don't, my days don't look the same, but I like feeling like everything has space around it. And it's like, I don't like juggling multiple thoughts at the same time.
Speaking of blank canvases, obviously the like in talking to writers, sometimes the blank page is an imposing one. When it came time to working on this book, was it a difficult thing to be faced with that initial like blank page, or because you'd already kind of done a lot of the work, list making and journaling, otherwise that wasn't actually a blank page at that point?
I never start a project with a blank page. I usually have about a year where I've been scribbling random thoughts as they come to me into like a notes app on my phone. Like if I read an article, I'll copy and paste like a quote from it or a link. If I just have a stray thought, anything that feels thematically grouped to like a subject that I think I'm at some point going to write about, I like plop it into a document. And then when the document, it always kind of feels like there's a point where it's gotten so long that I'm ready to like sift through it and find some sort of structure. And so usually I'll enter a project with a different document for each kind of section with already maybe like a dozen pages of notes. And then the process of making that into a first draft is still quite complicated because you're trying to, it's like a puzzle. You're trying to find a way to rearrange all this stuff that you have an intention to include, which is still a lot of work, but I never just open up a document and think, what am I going to write today? I already open up the document and look at the things and say, how am I going to sculpt this into something that I like?
If it's a puzzle, you already have a sense of the image of the puzzle. Like you're not blindly trying to create a puzzle without knowing what picture you're making.
I'm very much like this too with my cover design. Everyone has different process, but a lot of cover designers I know, they will open up like a blank page and just like muck about and hope for happy accidents, and they'll just play and iterate and drop things in and move them around and see what kind of cool um like combination of things result in that fluidity. And I'm someone who builds mood boards and draws out thumbnail sketches, and I never start a cover without having like a very tight idea of the concept and the style of it. And I don't think this is better. I think the play actually is I admire people who are able to just be freer, but I'm someone who like usually doesn't start something until I have a vision and I know what my intentions are, because I think I'm definitely a writer of books, not a writer in other formats. And so I'm thinking from the start, like, what is this final product going to be? Like how will it be packaged? Who is it for? What is its point? Um, and then the structure is like a necessary kind of guiding force to how I decide what to include or leave out and why.
So Elship as it exists right now, you had a vision of that and then you worked towards it?
Well, my vision was of it was has ch had changed because I was like very naive since it was my first project. My initial concept for Elship was I wanted it to be a list of everything I loved about her, the person I fell in love with, because I think it was the first time I had paid such close attention to someone else. Like I realized that like in fall, this seems so obvious now, but having never had this experience before, I realized that like all these little random details just got so heightened because of this like a chemical attraction that the ordinary things like how someone makes a sandwich suddenly became like a glittering jewel. And I thought my initial project was like, well, what if I make like an exhaustive list of all of these things I love about this person and maybe illustrate them and it's more like a picture book. And and so like that was my idea and then obviously it's become not that at all, but I think that's still speckled throughout. Like I do think if you went through every chapter, the majority of what I'm talking about is like why I love this person and then you have to kind of interject your own complexities and conflict and yeah, there's more that goes into making a book. But if I had had it my way at the beginning, I would have just it would just have been like a love letter. But other people don't want to read that, so I learned.
So the process eventually kind of dictated some of the results instead of the results dictating the process. It sounds like is
Yeah,
more your
but I
working
don't
way.
do that anymore. My projects are a lot more thought out because it makes it very difficult once you've written all this content that doesn't have a shape. Reshaping, I struggle with a lot. But then I guess when I did my initial rework and put it into categories of love, from that point on, everything became really clear and solid. And I sort of was resisting that form from the beginning. It seemed maybe too obvious or too difficult to pull off. I don't really think I successfully pull it off, but once I enforced that structure, it really helped me fill in at like aspects of the story that I had been leaving out or taking for granted. It just became obvious like which chapters were a bit thin or didn't really add up.
Speaking of things being clear, early on in the book you write, "I only know how to exist translucently," and obviously you bear a lot of yourself on these pages. Uh, were there moments at which you wanted to hold things back, or was there stuff that you just could not share?
There's definitely it's funny there is a lot that I didn't share. Most I didn't share, even though it doesn't seem like that. But I forget a lot of that now because the book did what I say in the introduction that it will do is like it has replaced my memory of the time in a lot of ways. But I did probably by the end of it write in things that I really didn't want to write. And I think that sometimes is an indication that you should write it. Like, I think that like for creative nonfiction or this type of like confessional work, um, you can smell dishonesty. Like the author has to show up in order for it to be relatable to the reader and believable. And so there were times where, of course, there are things in there that don't make me look great. I'm aware that it's icky. Um, and I had some lines around what I really would never, confess in a book or even to a friend. But for the most part, I tried to hold myself accountable to the project. And where I withheld the most was anything that felt like it was too violating to her. I was more protective of her than myself in the book.
Right. I think towards the end you write about the burning bits, and you were only going to write what you wanted to enshrine. That like you there is some reference to holding back, and obviously you don't say who this person is either. So that's ultimately the like full withholding of them. And is that protective of them or protective of what the two of you have, or like how do you conceive of
Both,
that? Both.
both, yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm careful not to say anything beyond what's in the book for that reason
Mm-hmm.
because it my only defense is that like those people don't exist anymore. Like everything about our lives is different. We're older, we've changed. And there's so much of what came to pass in that relationship outside of the book that is so much more beautiful and sacred to me than what I depicted. But at the time that I was writing it, I was scraping together like shards of evidence of like what was special. And I I did for a time think like I don't mind so much talking about the bad, but I felt a little bit sad about giving away some of the good, almost like if I said it aloud, it wouldn't be real or something. Um, and I'm just grateful that this book is like a time capsule of a distant time in my life, and it is not the the totality of what that relationship was. And so I can still have my private, independent experience of it.
Are you suggesting that like writing about the good stuff makes it less good, or like it
I
softens
think at
some
the
of that?
time I believed that about, I think I believed, or I guess I was distrustful that the good experience was, like we were talking about, like was real outside of my mind. And I wanted to only write things in the book that I felt were truthful, not just um, a fantasy or delusion that I had worked up into something that seemed to could be sold as art. Like I really wanted to put down the what it was, but then if you write something and it's then published and someone disputes it, or like then you risk like it rewriting your your memories of things. But that hasn't occurred. I didn't know. I'd never written like this, and I'd never written about another person. And I am very protective of her as a private citizen. And yeah, I did try to change enough in the book. I've be very tactical about my social media and just a lot of things to make sure that she gets to carry on living her private life.
Having gone through this experience and written this book, does it change how you reflect on that period of time, or was the process of writing this kind of part of that growth?
I think that prior to the manuscript being acquired, the book was like my it was mine. It was like the only part of the experience that could like be a vessel for that love that I could hold. And it was an essential, not the book itself, because it's not a diary actually, like it is art that I have curated. And I don't think I'm not suggesting anyone should write a book to um heal themselves, but it was a companion to the work I was doing to navigate that time. But by the time it had been acquired, so much had happened that I had a healthy distance from it, and it didn't really matter what happened from then on, like how we changed it or public perception, because I feel quite resolved in like my understanding of that chapter of my life and who I was and why I made the decisions I did and what it ultimately means in the greater scheme of my future and relationships. So I feel like grateful that the publishing took so long after the initial experience, because I think it probably wouldn't have been healthy to have outsiders doing that work of healing me. I think that would have been a false sort of cure.
Well, that chapter is encapsulated in Elseship, an unrequited affair, out now through Book Hug Press. Tree, thanks very much for joining me on the program and talking about the book.
Thank you for reading, and yes, thank you for sharing.